They thought they could humiliate me at my own brother's wedding by sticking me at table 12 with complete strangers while all my relatives sat at the head tables. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing something special for months, something that would turn their little power play into the most unforgettable moment of the entire reception. By the time I finished speaking, half the wedding party was in tears, and my family would never look at me the same way again. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Tiffany Miller, and I need to tell you about the day my family learned they had been underestimating me for 28 years. It started 6 months before my brother, Marcus's wedding to his fiancée Jennifer Walsh. Marcus had always been the golden child. Stanford MBA, 6-figure salary at a tech startup, perfect girlfriend from a wealthy Connecticut family. Meanwhile, I was an art school dropout who worked at a vintage bookstore and lived in a studio apartment above a pizza place in Portland. The wedding planning began innocently enough. Jennifer's family had connections to this exclusive vineyard in Napa Valley, complete with rolling hills and a restored 19th century mansion. The guest list swelled to 300 people, most of whom I had never met. Jennifer's father owned a chain of luxury hotels, so naturally, they were footing most of the bill and calling most of the shots. During our first family dinner to discuss arrangements, I watched my parents transform into completely different people. My mother, who usually wore discount store cardigans, suddenly started dropping brand names into conversation. My father began telling stories about his college golf team that I was pretty sure were exaggerated. They were so desperate to impress the Walsh family that they seemed to forget I existed. "Tiffany works in the arts," my mother would say vaguely when Jennifer's relatives asked about me, as if being specific about my bookstore job would somehow taint the family reputation. The real turning point came during the engagement party at the Walsh family's country club. I had driven down from Portland specifically for this event, taking unpaid time off work and spending money I didn't have on a dress that would fit the dress code. When I arrived, I found my place card at a table in the very back corner, seated with Jennifer's great-aunt's caregiver, a +1 who didn't speak English, and 2 teenagers who spent the entire evening on their phones. Marcus was giving a speech about how Jennifer had made him a better man, how their families were now united, how grateful he was for everyone's support. He thanked Jennifer's parents by name, mentioned several family friends who had helped with wedding planning, and even acknowledged the country club staff. He never once looked in my direction. That night in my hotel room, I made a decision. I started working on something that would take me the next 4 months to complete. The months leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in subtle family dynamics that I had somehow missed for most of my life. During dress shopping, my mother and Jennifer's mother bonded over expensive boutiques, while I sat in the corner holding purses. At the rehearsal dinner planning meeting, I watched my suggestions get politely ignored while Jennifer's college roommate's ideas were enthusiastically embraced. The final straw came 3 weeks before the wedding when I received my official invitation. After months of helping with small details, addressing envelopes, and listening to endless planning conversations, I opened the envelope to find I had been assigned to table 12. Not table 2 with my aunts and uncles. Not table 4 with Marcus's college friends who I had met several times. Table 12, which according to the seating chart I glimpsed at Jennifer's bridal shower, was populated entirely by distant relatives and obligation invites. My cousin Rebecca, who worked part-time at a nail salon, was at table 6. My uncle's new wife, who the family barely tolerated, was at table 8. Even Jennifer's former babysitter had somehow merited table 9. But me? The groom's only sister? Table 12, next to the kitchen doors where the servers would be constantly walking by. That weekend, I drove to my childhood home to confront my parents about the seating arrangement. I found them in the living room, surrounded by wedding favors they were assembling for Jennifer's mother. "It's just logistics. Honey," my mother said without looking up from the tiny boxes she was tying with ribbon. "Jennifer's family knows so many people and there are a lot of important business connections to consider." Important business connections, I repeated. And where do I fit into that category? My father glanced up from his pile of wedding programs. You know it's not personal, Tiff. It's just complicated. The Walsh family has certain expectations. Expectations that don't include acknowledging that Marcus has a sister? Don't be dramatic, my mother sighed. You'll have a lovely time at your table. Jennifer specifically requested that you sit with some very interesting people. I looked at the guest list printout on the coffee table and saw table 12. Jennifer's elderly great-uncle who was recovering from hip surgery, a family friend's teenage daughter, the photographer's assistant, and 3 people I didn't recognize with addresses from different states. Interesting people, I said quietly. That night, I finalized the project I had been working on since the engagement party. It had taken me months of research, phone calls, and careful documentation. I had interviewed relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, tracked down old family friends, and spent countless hours in the local library's newspaper archives. What I had discovered would change everything. The wedding day arrived with perfect California weather. The vineyard looked like something from a magazine spread, with white roses climbing the pergola and string lights creating a warm glow over the reception area. Jennifer looked stunning in her designer gown, and Marcus cleaned up well in his custom tuxedo. I wore a simple navy dress I had found at a consignment shop and did my own makeup in the hotel bathroom mirror. As guests began taking their seats for the ceremony, I watched my parents greeting the Walsh family like visiting dignitaries. My mother's laugh pitched higher than usual, my father's handshake more vigorous than I had ever seen. During the ceremony, I sat in the 4th row while Jennifer's extended family filled the first 3. I watched Marcus's face as Jennifer walked down the aisle. And for a moment, I remembered the little boy who used to build blanket forts with me and steal cookies from our mother's baking sheets, before he became the person who could forget he had a sister when it mattered. The reception began with cocktail hour, where I dutifully made small talk with distant relatives while my parents worked the room like seasoned politicians. Jennifer's father gave a welcome speech about family and new beginnings. Marcus's college roommate, who was serving as best man, told amusing stories about their fraternity days. Then came dinner service, and I found my way to table 12. My dining companions included Harold Walsh, Jennifer's 83-year-old great-uncle who immediately fell asleep in his chair, Kayla, the 16-year-old daughter of one of Jennifer's mother's book club friends, David, who turned out to be the backup photographer's intern, and 3 middle-aged couples who had driven down from Oregon and clearly didn't know anyone else at the wedding. "So, how do you know the happy couple?" asked Mrs. Peterson, one of the Oregon guests, as our salads arrived. "I'm Marcus's sister," I said, cutting into my mixed greens. The table went quiet for a moment. David the intern looked confused. "Oh, I thought his sister was—" He gestured vaguely toward the head tables. "Nope, that would be me." Kayla looked up from her phone for the first time all evening. "Wait, you're his sister and you're sitting back here? That's messed up." "Kayla," her mother whispered sharply. "What?" "It is messed up. My brother would never—" "It's fine," I interrupted, though something about this teenager's outrage on my behalf made my chest tight. Really? But as I watched the head table throughout dinner, seeing my parents laughing with Jennifer's relatives, seeing Marcus raise his glass in toast to people he had met 6 months ago while never once glancing toward table 12, I realized it wasn't fine. It wasn't fine at all. The evening progressed with the standard wedding reception timeline. First dance, father-daughter dance, cake cutting, bouquet toss. I participated when expected, smiled when photographed, and made appropriate conversation with my table mates. But the entire time I kept thinking about the folder in my hotel room upstairs, and about the speech I had prepared that no one was expecting me to give. As the evening wound toward the speeches portion of the reception, I excused myself to the ladies' room. In the mirror, I looked at my reflection and took a deep breath. In 10 minutes, everyone at this wedding would know exactly who Tiffany Miller was and what she was capable of. I had spent 4 months preparing for this moment. Tonight, my family would finally understand that they had made a very serious mistake. When I returned from the restroom, the DJ was adjusting his microphone, and the wedding coordinator was gathering the wedding party for speeches. Jennifer's maid of honor went first, telling a sweet story about their college friendship and how she knew Marcus was the one from their first date. The best man followed with his fraternity anecdotes and jokes about Marcus finally settling down. Then came the parents' speeches. Jennifer's father spoke eloquently about gaining a son and the beautiful future ahead. My own father stood up, visibly nervous, and delivered what sounded like a carefully rehearsed speech about family values and successful partnerships. He mentioned how proud he was of Marcus's achievements and how welcoming the Walsh family had been. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The wedding coordinator looked confused. This wasn't on her timeline. The DJ glanced around uncertainly. A few people at nearby tables turned to see who was disrupting the carefully orchestrated flow of events. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to carry, but not shouting. "I'd like to say something." Jennifer's face went pale. Marcus looked like he was trying to solve a complex math problem in his head. My mother's smile froze in place. "I'm Tiffany Miller," I continued, walking toward the front of the reception area. "Marcus's sister. Some of you might not have noticed me back at table 12, but that's okay. I've gotten used to being overlooked." The entire reception had gone quiet now. 300 people were staring at me, including several very wealthy strangers who were probably wondering if they should call security. I reached the microphone area and turned to face the crowd. 4 months ago, I started working on a little research project. See, I realized that while everyone was talking about family and new beginnings, I didn't actually know very much about our family history. So I decided to dig deeper. Marcus was shaking his head slightly, his eyes pleading with me to sit back down. Jennifer's mother had her phone out, possibly texting the wedding coordinator. But I had come too far to stop now. I spent weeks at the Portland Public Library, going through old newspaper archives. I called relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I even hired a genealogy researcher for a few hours. I paused, letting that sink in. What I found was absolutely fascinating. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my clutch purse. For instance, I learned that our great-grandfather, Thomas Miller, wasn't just a farmer like we always heard. He owned 3 successful farms across 2 counties and was considered one of the most innovative agricultural entrepreneurs in Oregon during the 1920s. A murmur went through the crowd. Some people looked intrigued. Others looked confused about where this was going. But that's not the interesting part, I continued. The interesting part is what happened to his money. Thomas Miller died in 1943, leaving behind an estate worth approximately $2 million in today's currency. That inheritance was split between his 3 children, including our grandfather, Robert Miller. My father's face had gone completely white. My mother was gripping her water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Now, Robert Miller was a smart man, but he was also a gambler. By 1960, he had lost most of his inheritance on bad investments and poker games. But not all of it. I unfolded my piece of paper. According to the documents I found at the county clerk's office, he managed to save enough to buy a small property in what is now downtown Portland. 30 acres of what everyone thought was worthless land. The reception was dead silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving. That land is currently worth approximately $15 million. Jennifer's father choked on his wine. Several people gasped audibly. The property was sold in 1987 to a development company. The proceeds went into a trust fund that was supposed to support the Miller family descendants for generations. I looked directly at my parents. A trust fund that Marcus and I should have had access to when we turned 25. My brother's mouth was hanging open. Jennifer looked like she was about to faint. "Now I know what you're thinking," I said, addressing the crowd again. "You're thinking, well, Tiffany, if this trust fund exists, why are you working at a bookstore?" That's an excellent question. I walked closer to my parents' table. It turns out that accessing the trust requires signatures from both surviving trustees. One trustee was our grandfather's lawyer, who died in 2003. The other trustee is someone who has been deliberately hiding this information from his own children for over a decade. Every eye in the room turned to my father. His face had gone from white to red to an alarming shade of purple. "Dad, would you like to explain to everyone here why you never told Marcus and me that we're millionaires?" The silence that followed was deafening. My father's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. My mother was staring at him with an expression I had never seen before. "Or maybe," I continued, "you'd like to explain why you've been living paycheck to paycheck, letting Marcus take out student loans and watching me struggle financially, all while sitting on information that could have changed our entire lives?" Jennifer's mother stood up abruptly. "I think this is highly inappropriate." "Mrs. Walsh," I interrupted politely, "with all due respect, this is a family matter. And since your family spent the entire wedding planning process making it clear that I don't really count as family, I figured this was my only chance to address it publicly." The crowd was riveted now. This was better than any reality TV show they had ever watched. "I have copies of all the legal documents in my hotel room," I said, holding up my phone. "Bank records, trust agreements, property deeds, correspondence between my father and the law firm that's been managing this money for the past 15 years. It's all there." Marcus finally found his voice. "Tiffany, what are you saying? Are you saying Dad has been stealing from us?" "I'm not saying anything," I replied calmly. "I'm just presenting facts. The trust fund exists. We were supposed to have access to it. We don't. Dad is the only person who can explain why." My father finally managed to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tiffany, this isn't the place." "Oh, I disagree," I said, my voice getting stronger. "This is exactly the place. Because for the past 6 months, I've watched this family bend over backwards to impress people who will probably never see you again after tonight. I've watched you treat me like an embarrassment while you pretend to be something you're not." I turned back to the crowd. "The funny thing is, we actually are somebody. The Miller family has money. Real money. We're not the poor relatives who need to be hidden at table 12. We're not the family that needs to apologize for existing in the same space as the Walsh family." Jennifer's father was whispering urgently to someone on his phone. Several guests were recording everything on their phones. The wedding photographer was getting shots of the whole scene, probably thinking this would make for an unforgettable wedding album. "So here's what's going to happen," I announced. "First, Dad, you're going to call the law firm on Monday morning and begin the process of releasing the trust fund to Marcus and me, as was always intended. Second, you're going to explain to Mom and Marcus exactly why you thought it was acceptable to hide this from your own family." I walked over to Marcus and Jennifer's table. "And third, you're all going to stop treating me like I'm something to be ashamed of." Because I'm not. I'm Miller, just like the rest of you, and it turns out that actually means something. The reception area was buzzing now with excited whispers and shocked conversations. Jennifer looked like she was trying to decide whether to laugh or cry. Marcus was staring at our father with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Congratulations on your marriage," I said to the happy couple. "I hope you have a beautiful life together. And Marcus, when you get back from your honeymoon, call me. We have a lot to discuss." I started walking back toward my table, then turned around one more time. "Oh, and thank you for seating me at table 12. It gave me the perfect view of everyone's faces." As I walked back to table 12, the entire reception erupted into chaos. I could hear frantic whispers, chairs scraping against the floor, and what sounded like Jennifer's mother having a heated phone conversation in the corner. But I felt strangely calm, like I had just set down a weight I'd been carrying for years. Harold Walsh, Jennifer's great-uncle, was suddenly wide awake for the first time all evening. "Well," he said in a gravelly voice as I sat down, "that was the most entertaining wedding speech I've heard in 60 years. Kayla, the teenager, was practically vibrating with excitement. "That was incredible. Did you really just expose your dad in front of 300 people?" "I presented some facts," I said, reaching for my water glass. "What people do with those facts is up to them." David, the photographer's intern, was frantically typing on his phone. "This is going to be all over social media within an hour. I've never seen anything like this at a wedding." "Neither have I," admitted Mrs. Peterson from Oregon. Though I have to say, your research skills are impressive. How did you track down all those documents? Before I could answer, my father appeared beside our table. His face was flushed and his hands were shaking slightly. Tiffany, we need to talk. Now. We're in the middle of dinner, Dad. Maybe later. This can't wait. His voice was strained. You've destroyed everything. I looked up at him calmly. I've destroyed what exactly? Your ability to lie to your own children? Harold Walsh snorted with what might have been laughter. Son, you might want to sit down before you have a heart attack. My father ignored him. You don't understand the complexity of the situation. There were reasons you let Marcus take out $80,000 in student loans when he had a trust fund waiting for him. I interrupted. There were reasons you watched me eat ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week while you had access to millions of dollars? A small crowd had gathered around our table now, including several people with phones recording everything. My father noticed and lowered his voice. Please, just come outside so we can discuss this privately. No. The word came out more firmly than I intended. We've had 28 years to discuss this privately. You chose not to. So now we're discussing it publicly. Jennifer appeared next to my father, still in her wedding dress, but looking significantly less radiant than she had an hour ago. Tiffany, I understand you're upset, but this is my wedding day. Could we please... Your wedding day, where you seated your new brother-in-law's only sister at the reject table? Harold Walsh interjected. Honey, I've been to a lot of weddings, and that's just poor manners. Jennifer's mouth fell open. Apparently, nobody had expected the elderly great-uncle to have opinions about wedding etiquette. Look, I said, standing up and addressing both my father and Jennifer, I don't want to ruin anyone's special day. The reception can continue. Everyone can go back to celebrating. But I'm not going to pretend this conversation didn't happen, and I'm not going to apologize for telling the truth. Marcus finally made his way over, weaving through the crowd of curious guests. He looked like he was in shock. Tiffany, is this real? Is there actually money? I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I had taken of one of the bank statements. $7.3 million as of last month. Probably more now, since it's been earning interest for years. He stared at the screen, then at our father, then back at me. Dad, how could you not tell us about this? It's complicated, my father said weakly. There were legal issues, tax implications. For 15 years? Marcus's voice was rising. There were tax implications for 15 years that prevented you from mentioning that we had money? Jennifer's father appeared, looking like a man who was rapidly recalculating the social dynamics of this merger. Perhaps we should all take a step back and... Mr. Walsh, I said politely, this really doesn't concern you. This is between my family and the trust fund that my father has been hiding from us. But it does concern us now, he replied, his business instincts clearly taking over. Jennifer is married to Marcus. If there are family financial assets involved... Dad, stop. Jennifer grabbed her father's arm. Just stop talking. The crowd around us was growing larger. I could see people at other tables straining to hear the conversation. The DJ had given up on playing music and was openly watching the drama unfold. My mother finally approached, moving like she was walking through water. She looked older than I had ever seen her. Tiffany, your father was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From having enough money to pay for college without working 3 jobs. From being able to afford decent housing. From not having to choose between buying groceries and paying rent? You don't understand, she said, her voice barely audible. When your grandfather died, your father was so young. He made some mistakes with his own inheritance. He was afraid. He was afraid of what? He was afraid you and Marcus would make the same mistakes he did. Lose it all like he lost his. The crowd around us had gone completely silent. This was clearly not what anyone had expected to hear at a vineyard wedding in Napa Valley. So, instead of teaching us about money management, I said slowly, he decided to just not tell us the money existed? My mother nodded miserably. For 15 years, another nod. While we struggled financially, took out loans, worked multiple jobs, and worried about bills constantly. He was going to tell you, she whispered, when you were older, More mature. Marcus let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. More mature? I'm 31 years old. I have a mortgage and a wife and a corporate job. How much more mature do I need to be? Harold Walsh, who had been listening to this entire exchange with obvious fascination, cleared his throat. If I may offer some perspective from someone who's been handling family money for over half a century. Everyone turned to look at him. Your father is an idiot, he said matter-of-factly. That's the worst financial parenting I've ever heard of. And I lived through the Great Depression. Jennifer covered her face with her hands. Oh my God, Uncle Harold, please don't— What? The man let his children struggle unnecessarily while sitting on millions of dollars because he was protecting them. That's not protection, that's control. And it's stupid control that. My father's face was now completely red. You don't understand the situation. I understand that you've been lying to your family for over a decade, Harold interrupted. And I understand that your daughter just had to publicly embarrass you at a wedding to get you to tell the truth. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Jennifer starting to cry. Not delicate wedding tears, but full-on sobbing. This was supposed to be the perfect day, she said through her tears. Everything was planned perfectly, and now my wedding is going to be remembered as the day the groom's sister exposed a family scandal. I felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, I hadn't actually intended to ruin her wedding. I had just wanted acknowledgement, respect, and the truth. Jennifer, I said quietly, I'm sorry this happened on your wedding day, but it was the only day I knew I'd have everyone's attention. She looked at me through her tears. Why couldn't you just talk to them privately? Because I tried that. 3 weeks ago, when I confronted them about the seating arrangement. They dismissed me then too. They've been dismissing me my entire life. Marcus sat down heavily in one of the empty chairs at our table. I can't believe this is real. I can't believe Dad has been lying to us about this. The money is real, I said. The legal documents are real. The only question now is what we're going to do about it. Harold Walsh raised his hand like he was in a classroom. If I could make another suggestion? Everyone looked at him again. Get a lawyer, tonight, before anyone has a chance to move money around or suddenly discover new complications with the trust fund. My father went pale. I would never. Based on tonight's revelations, Harold continued, I'd say your credibility regarding financial honesty is somewhat compromised, and that's when the real family meeting began. What happened next was unlike anything I had ever witnessed at a family gathering. Jennifer's mother, who had been making frantic phone calls in the corner, suddenly marched over to our impromptu family meeting with the determination of a woman on a mission. Excuse me? She announced, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. But I just got off the phone with our family attorney, and he's advised me that we need to address something immediately. My father looked confused. I don't understand why your attorney— Because, Mrs. Walsh interrupted, my daughter just married into a family with undisclosed financial assets. Assets that could significantly impact prenuptial agreements, tax planning, and estate considerations. The blood drained from Jennifer's face. Mom, we didn't sign a prenup. Exactly, her mother replied grimly. Which means if this trust fund is legitimate, Jennifer is now legally entitled to half of Marcus's share in the event of a divorce. Marcus stood up so quickly his chair fell over. Are you seriously talking about divorce at my wedding reception? I'm talking about protecting my daughter's interests, Mrs. Walsh shot back. Interests that are now significantly more complicated thanks to your family's financial secrets. Harold Walsh wheezed with what I was beginning to recognize as amusement. Eleanor, sit down before you give yourself an aneurysm. The boy just found out he's a millionaire 5 minutes ago. Give him time to process. But Mrs. Walsh was in full lawyer-wife mode now. Process? Richard, there are legal implications here that need immediate attention. If the Miller family has been hiding assets— We weren't hiding anything, my mother protested weakly. We didn't mention it. That's literally the definition of hiding something, Kayla pointed out from her seat at table 12. The teenager had been following this entire drama with the enthusiasm of someone watching her favorite soap opera. Mrs. Peterson from Oregon leaned over to her husband. "Ralph, are you getting all this? Because this is better than anything we've ever seen on TV." The crowd around us had grown even larger. I could see people from other tables openly abandoning their desserts to get closer to the action. The wedding photographer was documenting everything, probably thinking this would either be the most requested wedding album deletion in history or the most viral wedding story ever told. My father finally seemed to find his voice again. "Look, everyone needs to calm down. Yes, there's a trust fund. Yes, I should have told the kids about it sooner. But there were legitimate reasons." "Name one," I interrupted. "The money comes with conditions," he said, looking increasingly desperate. "Conditions that I didn't think either of you were ready to handle." Marcus sat back down, his face pale. "What kind of conditions?" My father glanced around at the crowd, clearly uncomfortable with having this conversation in front of 300 strangers. "The trust requires both beneficiaries to be stable, married, employed in respectable professions." The silence that followed was deafening. "Are you telling me," I said slowly, "that you've been withholding our inheritance because I'm not married?" "Not just that," my father said quickly. "The trust language is very specific. Both beneficiaries need to demonstrate financial responsibility, stable employment, and traditional family values." Harold Walsh snorted. "Richard, what year do you think this is? 1950? The trust was written in 1943, my father replied defensively. "The language reflects the time period." "Bullshit," I said, and several people gasped at the profanity. "I've seen the trust documents. There's nothing in there about marriage requirements or traditional values. I spent 4 months researching this, remember?" My father's face went white again. "You couldn't have seen the actual trust documents. They're sealed. By the law firm of Morrison, Keller and Associates in downtown Portland," I finished. "The same firm where I spent 3 hours last week reviewing every page of the trust agreement with a paralegal named Susan Chen." The crowd murmured with excitement. This was better than any wedding entertainment they could have imagined. "The trust," I continued, pulling out my phone again, "requires both beneficiaries to be 25 years old, mentally competent, and not currently incarcerated. That's it. No marriage requirement. No employment restrictions. No traditional family values clause." Jennifer was staring at her new husband with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Marcus, did you know about any of this?" "I swear I didn't," he said, his voice hollow. "I had no idea." Mrs. Walsh was furiously typing on her phone. "I'm calling our attorney right now. This situation needs immediate legal review." "Eleanor, for the love of God," Harold Walsh said. "Let the kids finish their conversation before you start filing lawsuits." But Mrs. Walsh was beyond reason now. "There are financial disclosure laws in California. If the Miller family failed to properly disclose assets before the marriage..." "The marriage happened 3 hours ago," I pointed out. "And Marcus just found out about the money 20 minutes ago. He couldn't have disclosed something he didn't know existed. That's exactly the problem," she replied grimly. "How do we know what else they're hiding?" My mother stood up suddenly, swaying slightly. "We're not hiding anything else. There's just the trust fund. And the property in Oregon," my father added quietly. Everyone turned to stare at him. "What property in Oregon?" Marcus demanded. "The original family land? 30 acres. We still own it." I felt like I was going to be sick. "We still own the land? The land that's worth $15 million? "Well, technically it's worth more now," my father mumbled. "Property values have increased significantly since the last appraisal." Jennifer started crying again, but these weren't sad tears. These were hysterical, overwhelmed, what is happening to my life tears. "How much more?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. "As of last year's assessment, approximately $22 million. The crowd erupted. People were talking over each other, phones were ringing, and I was pretty sure I heard someone placing bets on what other secrets would come out next. Harold Walsh raised his hand again. If I may interrupt this fascinating financial revelation, everyone quieted down. Young lady, he said, addressing me directly, you've done something remarkable here tonight. You've single-handedly uncovered a family conspiracy that's been going on for over a decade. But I have to ask, what exactly are you planning to do now? It was a fair question. In all my months of planning this confrontation, I had focused entirely on exposing the truth. I hadn't really thought about what came next. I want access to what's legally mine, I said finally. I want the trust fund released, and I want equal ownership of the Oregon property. And I want my father to explain to a lawyer exactly why he thought it was acceptable to lie to his own children about this. And if he refuses? Harold asked. I looked directly at my father. Then I'll file a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, elder abuse, and fraud. And I'll make sure every detail of this family's financial manipulation becomes public record. My father stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You would actually sue your own family? You would actually steal from your own children? The standoff that followed was interrupted by the most unexpected voice of all. Stop. Jennifer stood up, still in her wedding dress, mascara streaked down her cheeks, but with a firmness in her voice that surprised everyone. Just stop. All of you. She looked around at the crowd of guests, at the phones recording everything, at the chaos that had replaced what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. This ends now, she said. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the property. I don't care about any of it. What I care about is that Marcus has a sister who loves him enough to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult. She turned to me. Tiffany, I'm sorry we seated you at table 12. I'm sorry we made you feel invisible. And I'm sorry it took you exposing a family secret at my wedding for us to realize how badly we've been treating you. Then she turned to my parents. And you two need to fix this. Tonight. Not next week. Not after we get back from our honeymoon. Tonight. Because this is your family. And you're destroying it. The reception area had gone completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. Now, Jennifer continued, everyone who isn't a Miller needs to go back to their tables, finish their cake, and pretend they're having a good time at my wedding. Because despite everything that's happened tonight, I'm still married to the man I love, and I refuse to let family drama ruin that. It was, without question, the most impressive thing I had ever seen anyone do. Jennifer's command carried surprising authority. The crowd of onlookers began reluctantly dispersing back to their tables, though I could see them stealing glances over their shoulders every few seconds. The photographer was still snapping pictures, but from a more respectful distance. Even Mrs. Walsh, who had been in full attack mode moments earlier, seemed to deflate slightly. But Harold Walsh remained firmly planted in his chair at table 12. I'm staying, he announced. This is the most interesting family meeting I've attended in decades, and I'm not missing the resolution. Jennifer looked at her elderly great-uncle with something approaching affection. Fine, Uncle Harold. But everyone else needs to give us some space. As the crowd dispersed, I found myself sitting back down at table 12 with my parents, Marcus, Jennifer, and Harold. The teenage girl Kayla had been moved to another table by her mortified mother, but not before she whispered, "You're my hero," as she walked past. All right, Jennifer said, pulling her wedding dress around her like armor. Here's what's going to happen. Dad Miller, you're going to call that law firm first thing Monday morning and arrange for both Marcus and Tiffany to access their trust funds immediately. My father opened his mouth to protest, but Jennifer held up her hand. I'm not finished. You're also going to transfer equal ownership of the Oregon property to both of them. Because hiding a $22 million asset from your own children isn't protection, it's theft. Harold Walsh clapped slowly. I like this girl. Furthermore, Jennifer continued, you're going to pay for a family therapist, because this level of deception doesn't happen in a healthy family dynamic, and everyone here needs professional help to work through it. My mother was crying quietly now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They looked more like tears of relief. Jennifer, Marcus said softly, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. Because I just married into this family, which means your problems are now my problems. And I refuse to spend the next 50 years walking on eggshells around family secrets and hidden resentments. She turned to me. Tiffany, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. We treated you terribly during the wedding planning, and we treated you even worse today. You shouldn't have had to expose family secrets at my wedding to get basic respect. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. I really didn't want to ruin your wedding. I just didn't know any other way to make them listen. You didn't ruin it, she said firmly. You made it memorable. There's a difference. Harold Walsh wheezed again. Honey, this wedding is going to be talked about for the next 20 years. People will be telling stories about the night Tiffany Miller exposed the family fortune at the Miller-Walsh wedding. My father finally found his voice again. I know you all think I was trying to hurt you, but I wasn't. I was genuinely trying to protect you from making the same mistakes I made. What mistakes? Marcus asked. My father took a deep breath. When I inherited my share of the original family money, I was 23 years old and I thought I knew everything. I invested in get-rich-quick schemes. I bought expensive toys I didn't need. I lent money to friends who never paid me back. Within 5 years, I had blown through almost everything. The table was quiet. Listening. I managed to save enough to buy a small house and start a family, but I spent years regretting how careless I had been with something that was supposed to last generations. When the trust fund matured and Marcus and Tiffany became eligible, I panicked. I told myself I was protecting them from their own inexperience. But you weren't protecting us from inexperience, I said gently. You were protecting us from having any experience at all. There's a difference between teaching someone to be careful with money and pretending the money doesn't exist. I know that now, my father said, his voice cracking slightly. I know I handled this completely wrong, but I kept thinking there would be a better time, a right moment to explain everything. When? Marcus asked. When would have been the right moment? When I was 35? 40? 50? I don't know, my father admitted. I really don't know. My mother reached over and took his hand. Robert, we have to fix this. We have to make this right. Harold Walsh leaned forward. If I may offer some practical advice from someone who's been managing family wealth for longer than most of you have been alive. Everyone looked at him expectantly. First, get all the legal paperwork sorted out immediately. No delays, no excuses. The trust fund should be accessible within a week, if you do it properly. Second, hire a financial advisor who specializes in sudden wealth syndrome. Yes, that's a real thing, and yes, both Marcus and Tiffany are going to need help adjusting to their new financial reality. He paused to take a sip of water. Third, establish clear boundaries about family involvement in financial decisions going forward. Robert, you've proven you can't be trusted to act in your children's best interests when it comes to money, so you need to step back and let them make their own choices. My father winced but nodded. And fourth, Harold continued, recognize that this family dynamic is going to change dramatically. Tiffany won't be the struggling artist anymore, and Marcus won't be the only successful child. Everyone's going to have to adjust their assumptions about each other. It was practical advice, but I could see the truth of it. Everything was about to change. There's something else we need to address, Jennifer said, looking around the table. The fact that this conversation happened in front of 300 people, many of whom recorded it on their phones. I felt a chill run down my spine. In my anger and determination to expose the truth, I hadn't really considered the long-term consequences of doing it so publicly. By tomorrow morning, Jennifer continued, this story is going to be all over social media. Woman exposes family fortune at brother's wedding is exactly the kind of content that goes viral, Marcus groaned. Oh, God. My coworkers are going to see this. My boss was here tonight. My book club friends are going to have questions, my mother said faintly. Good, Harold Walsh said firmly. Let them have questions. Maybe other families will see this and realize that financial honesty is important. But I was starting to feel sick. The adrenaline from confronting my family was wearing off, and the reality of what I had done was sinking in. I had just aired our most private family business in front of hundreds of people, many of whom I didn't even know. I think I made a mistake, I said quietly. Which part? Jennifer asked. The public part. I should have found another way to handle this. I should have— Stop, Marcus interrupted. Tiffany, I've been thinking about this while everyone was talking. Dad has been lying to us for 15 years. 15 years. How many private conversations would it have taken for him to finally tell the truth? He looked directly at our father. How many times did Tiffany try to talk to you privately about feeling excluded from this family? How many times did I mention struggling with student loans or worrying about money? You had countless opportunities to help us and you chose not to. My father's shoulders sagged. You're right. You're absolutely right. So maybe it took a public confrontation to get a public admission, Marcus continued. Maybe that's what needed to happen. Jennifer nodded. And honestly, I'd rather have a viral wedding video about exposing family secrets than a boring wedding video that no one ever watches. Harold Walsh raised his water glass. To family honesty, even when it's messy and public and happens at inappropriate times. We all stared at him for a moment, then simultaneously reached for our glasses. To family honesty, we echoed, and clinked glasses around table 12. As we drank our toast, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in my life, I felt like an equal member of this family. Not the struggling artist, not the embarrassment, not the afterthought. Just Tiffany Miller, surrounded by people who finally had to acknowledge that I existed. It wasn't the resolution I had imagined, but it was the resolution we needed. 3 weeks after the wedding, I was sitting in the offices of Morrison, Keller and Associates, signing papers that would change my life forever. The paralegal, Susan Chen, who had helped me with my initial research, smiled as she watched me initial page after page of legal documents. I have to say, Susan said as she notarized the final signature, in 15 years of handling trust funds, I've never seen one activated quite this dramatically. The money was real, all of it. My share of the trust fund came to $3.7 million, plus equal ownership of the Oregon property that was now appraised at $24.5 million. Marcus and I would need to decide whether to sell the land or develop it, but that was a conversation for another day. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Just finished at the bank. This is surreal. Lunch tomorrow to talk about property management? I texted back. Yes. Also, Jennifer wants to plan a proper family dinner. One where you're not finding out about hidden millions. The viral fame had been exactly as intense as Jennifer had predicted. The wedding video had been viewed over 2 million times on various social media platforms. I'd received interview requests from 3 different talk shows, a book deal offer, and more LinkedIn messages than I could count from financial advisors. But the most surprising message had come from my cousin Rebecca, who worked at the nail salon. Tiffany, her voicemail had said, I don't know if you remember, but at Jennifer's bridal shower, I mentioned that Grandpa Robert used to tell weird stories about family money when he was drinking. Stories about land and banks and lawyers. Everyone thought he was just rambling, but maybe he wasn't rambling after all. Call me. It turned out that several family members had pieces of the puzzle. Uncle Jerry remembered their father mentioning property investments. Aunt Linda had kept some old letters that referenced the trust situation. Cousin Mike had wondered why Grandpa Robert always seemed to have money for emergencies despite living. Modestly, my father hadn't been the only one keeping secrets. He had just been the one with access to the legal documents. The family therapy sessions that Jennifer had mandated were intense. Dr. Martinez, our therapist, had specialized in family financial trauma, which was apparently more common than I had imagined. She helped us understand that my father's behavior wasn't malicious, it was a trauma response from his own financial mistakes combined with control issues and misguided protectiveness. Robert genuinely believed he was helping. Dr. Martinez explained during our 4th session. But he was operating from a place of fear rather than trust. Fear that his children would repeat his mistakes, fear of losing control of the family narrative, and fear of admitting he had made poor decisions. The sessions were helping slowly. My mother was learning to assert herself more in family decisions. My father was learning to communicate his concerns without withholding information. Marcus was learning to separate his achievements from family approval. And I was learning that I had spent so many years fighting for recognition that I had forgotten how to accept it when it was offered. But the most unexpected outcome of the whole wedding drama was my relationship with Jennifer. 2 weeks after returning from her honeymoon, she called me with a proposal. "I want to start a nonprofit," she said without preamble. "Something focused on financial literacy for young adults from families who don't talk about money. And I want you to help me run it." "I work at a bookstore," I reminded her. "You worked at a bookstore," she corrected. "Now you're a millionaire with first-hand experience in family financial dysfunction and a demonstrated talent for research and public speaking. Plus, you clearly don't back down from difficult conversations." She wasn't wrong. The skills I had developed in uncovering the trust fund, researching legal documents, tracking down information, asking uncomfortable questions, were surprisingly transferable to nonprofit work. "Think about it," Jennifer continued. "How many families are struggling with money issues because no one ever taught them basic financial skills? How many parents are making decisions based on fear instead of facts? How many kids are going to repeat their parents' mistakes because money is treated like this shameful secret?" I thought about my years of eating ramen noodles while millions of dollars sat in a bank account. I thought about Marcus taking out student loans he didn't need. I thought about my father's shame preventing him from teaching us what he had learned from his own mistakes. "What would we call it?" I asked. "The Miller Foundation for Financial Transparency." 6 months later, the Miller Foundation had its first office space, 2 full-time employees, and a waiting list of families requesting financial counseling services. Our origin story, the viral wedding video, had attracted more attention and funding than we had ever expected. Harold Walsh, Jennifer's great-uncle, had become our first major donor and unofficial board advisor. "Best wedding entertainment I ever witnessed," he said when he wrote the check. "The least I can do is help you turn that mess into something productive." The bookstore where I used to work now sold copies of our financial literacy guide on the front table. My former manager, Dave, loved telling customers that his ex-employee was the woman from that viral wedding video who became a millionaire, but the real changes were subtler and more personal. Family dinners at my parents' house were different now. We talked openly about money, not just the trust fund, but everyday financial decisions. My mother mentioned when she was worried about a medical bill. My father asked for advice about his retirement planning. Marcus and Jennifer discussed their mortgage options with the family instead of handling everything privately. I still lived in my studio apartment above the pizza place, though now it was by choice rather than necessity. I was looking at houses, but I wanted to take my time and make a decision based on what I actually wanted rather than what I could finally afford. The Oregon property was being developed into a mixed-use community with affordable housing, retail space, and offices for local nonprofits. Marcus and I had decided to use the development as a model for responsible wealth management, profitable but socially conscious. Last week, I received a wedding invitation that made me smile. My cousin Rebecca was getting married, and she had specifically requested that I give a speech at her reception. "But not the kind of speech you gave at Marcus's wedding," she wrote in her note. "Just something nice about love and family. Save the financial investigations for your day job." I was planning to give a perfectly normal, appropriately sentimental maid of honor speech, but I made a mental note to double-check the seating chart when I RSVP'd. Old habits die hard. The truth is, I never expected that one moment of frustration and anger would reshape my entire family's relationship with money, honesty, and each other. I certainly never expected it to become my career. But sometimes the most important conversations happen at the most inappropriate times, in front of the most inappropriate audiences. Sometimes you have to make a scene to make a point. And sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is refuse to let them pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't. My name is Tiffany Miller. I'm the woman who exposed her family's financial secrets at her brother's wedding. And I'm proud of it. Because that night at table 12, surrounded by strangers who became witnesses, I didn't just find my voice. I found my purpose. And I learned that sometimes the most uncomfortable truth is the one that sets everyone free. 1 year later, I found myself standing in front of another wedding reception, but this time everything was different. This was Rebecca's wedding, my cousin who had been seated at table 6 while I was relegated to table 12 at Marcus's reception. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rebecca had asked me to be her maid of honor, and more importantly, she had specifically requested that I sit at the head table. "After what you did at Marcus's wedding," she had said with a grin, "you've earned permanent VIP seating at all family events." The wedding was beautiful, held at a restored barn in the countryside outside Portland. Rebecca worked at a nail salon, and her fiancé Danny was a mechanic, so this was a much more modest affair than the Napa Valley extravaganza. But there was something authentic about it that made it feel more celebratory than Marcus's 300-person production. As I stood to give my maid of honor speech, I looked out at the familiar faces in the crowd. Marcus and Jennifer were at table 2, holding hands and looking genuinely happy. My parents sat at table 3, and for the first time in years, they looked relaxed at a family gathering. Even Harold Walsh had made the trip up from California, insisting that he wasn't going to miss the sequel. "Good evening, everyone," I began, adjusting the microphone. For those who don't know me, I'm Tiffany Miller, Rebecca's cousin and maid of honor. Some of you might remember me from another family wedding where I gave somewhat more controversial speech. The crowd laughed, and I could see several people pulling out their phones. Apparently, my reputation preceded me. "Don't worry," I continued with a smile. "Tonight's speech is going to be much more traditional. Rebecca specifically requested no financial investigations, no family secrets, and absolutely no dramatic revelations about hidden assets." More laughter, and I saw Rebecca cover her face with her hands in mock embarrassment. But I do want to talk about what I've learned this past year about family, honesty, and the courage to speak up when something isn't right. I paused, looking directly at Rebecca. "Rebecca, you and Danny represent something that got lost in my family for a while. The idea that love and support don't require perfect circumstances or impressive credentials. You've built your relationship on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine partnership. You don't hide parts of yourselves from each other, and you don't pretend to be something you're not for anyone else's benefit." I could see my parents nodding, and my mother wiped away a tear. This past year has taught me that the most important conversations often happen at the most inconvenient times. Sometimes in the middle of wedding receptions, sometimes in therapy sessions, and sometimes over pizza at 2 a.m. when someone finally admits they've been carrying a secret that's too heavy to bear alone. The room had gotten quiet, people leaning in to listen. The Miller Foundation that Jennifer and I started has worked with over 300 families now. And I've learned something important. Almost every family has secrets about money, but very few families talk about them openly. Parents hide financial struggles from their children. Adult children hide debt from their parents. Siblings compete instead of supporting each other. And everyone suffers in silence. I looked around the room, making eye contact with various family members. But Rebecca and Danny, you two have something special. You've built a relationship where money conversations happen naturally, where there are no hidden bank accounts, no secret debts, no mysterious trusts that mysteriously appear 15 years later. Harold Walsh let out his characteristic wheeze of amusement. You budget together, you plan together, you make financial decisions together, and when Rebecca wanted to quit the nail salon to go back to school for graphic design, Danny didn't hide his concerns about money. He said, "Let's figure out how to make this work," and then they actually figured it out together. I smiled at the couple. That's what real partnership looks like. Not pretending everything is perfect, but being honest about the challenges and working through them together. The crowd murmured approvingly. So my advice to you both is this: keep talking to each other. About everything. About money, about dreams, about fears, about the weird things your families do that you want to handle differently. Don't let secrets grow in the shadows because secrets have a way of exploding at inappropriate times. More laughter, and I saw Marcus shake his head with amusement. And to everyone else here tonight, I continued, I want to challenge you to have one honest conversation about money with someone in your family this week. Not a dramatic confrontation at a wedding reception, just an honest conversation. Ask your parents how they learned to manage money. Tell your adult children if you're worried about retirement. Talk to your siblings about whether everyone understands the family financial situation. I could see people nodding, several taking notes on their phones. Because here's what I've learned. Financial honesty isn't just about numbers and bank accounts. It's about respect, trust, and treating your family members like capable adults who deserve to know the truth about their own lives. I raised my champagne glass. So here's to Rebecca and Danny, who are starting their marriage with honesty, transparency, and a shared commitment to facing whatever comes next together. May your love story be filled with open conversations, mutual support, and absolutely no dramatic revelations at family gatherings. The crowd laughed and raised their glasses. To Rebecca and Danny. As I sat down, Rebecca leaned over and hugged me. That was perfect, she whispered. Meaningful but not melodramatic. I'm learning the difference, I replied. The rest of the reception was wonderfully normal. No family secrets were revealed. No one had a financial meltdown. The most dramatic moment was when Danny's 8-year-old nephew accidentally knocked over the cake table. But even that was handled with good humor and teamwork. Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, my father approached me. Tiffany, can I talk to you for a minute? We walked outside to the barn's porch, where string lights created a warm glow against the night sky. I wanted to thank you, he said quietly. For what? For refusing to let us keep pretending. For forcing us to deal with our problems instead of ignoring them. For caring enough about this family to fight for it, even when fighting meant making everyone uncomfortable. He paused, looking out at the countryside. I know I handled everything wrong. The money, the secrets, the way we treated you. But this past year, working through it all in therapy, watching you and Jennifer build something meaningful with the foundation, seeing Marcus and Jennifer build their marriage on actual honesty. I'm proud of what came out of that terrible night. Dad, you don't have to— Yes, I do, he interrupted. I spent 15 years being afraid that you and Marcus would make the same financial mistakes I made. But what I should have been afraid of was making the same parenting mistakes my father made. I looked at him curiously. My father never talked to me about money either, he admitted. Never explained the family finances, never taught me how to manage wealth responsibly. He just handed me a check when I turned 21 and said, "Try not to lose it all." And when I did lose most of it, he was so disappointed that he barely spoke to me for 2 years. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. So when the trust fund came available for Marcus and me, I panicked, he said. I thought if I could control the timing, control the circumstances, I could protect you from repeating my mistakes. But all I really did was repeat my father's mistake of not trusting his own children. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sound of music and laughter from inside the barn. For what it's worth, I said finally, I think you're a better father than you were a financial guardian. It just took us a while to figure out the difference, he smiled. The Miller Foundation is doing good work, Tiffany. You're helping families avoid the kind of mess we created. I'm proud of you. Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed since that dramatic evening at Marcus's wedding. The trust fund money had given me financial security, but more importantly, it had given my family the crisis we needed to finally start talking honestly with each other. The Miller Foundation was now working with families across 3 states, helping them navigate everything from basic budgeting to complex inheritance situations. Jennifer had become a formidable nonprofit director, and I had discovered that my talent for uncovering uncomfortable truths was actually a valuable professional skill when applied constructively. Marcus and I had decided to sell the Oregon property to a developer who specialized in sustainable communities. Our share of the proceeds would fund the foundation for the next decade, ensuring we could help hundreds more families learn to communicate about money before they reached their own crisis point. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the simplest one. We had family dinners now. Real ones, where we talked about actual problems and celebrated actual victories. Where money was just another topic of conversation, not a forbidden subject wrapped in shame and secrecy. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Thank you for the perfect speech. No family drama, just family love. You've come a long way from table 12. I smiled and texted back, "We all have." Because that's what I had learned over this incredible year. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for your family is refuse to accept the role they've assigned you. Sometimes love means making people uncomfortable. And sometimes the best thing that can happen to a family is someone brave enough to tell the truth, even when the timing is terrible and the audience is inappropriate. My name is Tiffany Miller. I turned a moment of family humiliation into a platform for family healing. And I learned that the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay silent about what matters. That night at table 12 changed everything, and I wouldn't take back a single uncomfortable moment of it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.